The man who seeks to please everyone becomes contemptible to all, while the man who pleases himself alone often earns the world's respect. This is not mere irony, but a fundamental law of human nature that operates with the regularity of physical principles, yet one that remains invisible to those who most need to see it. I have observed for 30 years in Frankfurt that those who frantically adjust their masks to suit every spectator lose their faces entirely. They become hollow men, mirrors reflecting others' expectations, empty vessels that everyone uses but no one values. Meanwhile, those rare individuals who withdraw their participation from this exhausting theater, who dare to live according to their own nature rather than others' demands, discover something the accommodators can scarcely conceive: genuine respect, deeper relationships, and the strange peace that comes from authentic existence. Why does the opposite of what we expect occur? Because beneath all social performance lies a blind metaphysical force. I call the will, and this will has trapped you more completely than any prison with bars. What follows is not comfortable wisdom, but necessary truth. The method for seeing through the mechanisms of your own enslavement and the difficult path toward the only freedom available to conscious beings. The question is whether you possess the courage to look. I begin with an observation that will disturb the comfortable. The vast majority of mankind passes through life as actors upon a stage they did not design, performing roles written by others, and believing here lies the deepest tragedy that these performances constitute genuine existence. Consider the Frankfurt merchant I observed over many years. At 45, a severe illness concentrated his mind wonderfully. As Dr. Johnson said, the prospect of hanging does. He realized with horror that he had spent 20 years building a career that bored him profoundly, maintaining relationships that exhausted him completely, and upholding principles he did not believe all to avoid disappointing his father, who had been dead for a decade. He sought to satisfy his wife's family, who viewed him as a convenient source of income. He impressed neighbors whose opinions he secretly despised. His entire existence had been authored by committee, and the result possessed all the coherence of a camel, which, as everyone knows, is merely a horse designed by such means. This is not exceptional, but typical. You, too, must ask 3 questions that reveal whether you sleepwalk through life. Did I choose this path, or did I inherit it from others' expectations? Would I pursue this if no one knew, if no audience watched and applauded? Am I being myself, or am I performing what I believe others require? Most humans maintain a double life. You harbor one set of thoughts privately while presenting another for public consumption. You know your genuine opinion on matters of importance, yet you voice the acceptable view when in company. This split is the unmistakable signature of performance over authenticity. The social theater has 4 stages where you perform: within family, at your profession, in society at large, and most insidiously, even in solitude, where the internalized audience continues its eternal observation. Begin this very evening a practice I call the evening reckoning. Before sleep, review your day's interactions. For each significant encounter, ask with brutal honesty, was I myself, or was I what they wanted? Record your answers faithfully for 7 days. The ratio of performance to authenticity will disturb you, and this disturbance marks the beginning of awakening. Do not mistake basic courtesy for performance. The error is effacing your genuine nature to secure approval. Neither attempt sudden authenticity without understanding, which produces only crude rudeness, not liberation. When you recognize that most of what you considered your life was actually a script written by others, the prison becomes visible. And seeing the prison is the first step toward the door. Now, I must reveal why this bondage exists, for recognition without understanding produces merely despair, not liberation. Universal approval is geometrically impossible. This seems obvious, yet observe how humans exhaust themselves attempting it. For every position you take, someone objects. For every choice you make, someone judges. If you speak freely, you are too forward. If you remain silent, you are too reserved. If you spend money, you are wasteful. If you save it, you are miserly. The expectations you face contradict each other absolutely, making their simultaneous satisfaction not merely difficult, but logically impossible as squaring the circle or constructing perpetual motion. Take 5 people whose approval matters to you. Write what each expects. You will discover immediate contradictions. What pleases your mother offends your wife. What satisfies your employer disturbs your conscience. What impresses your neighbors violates your genuine values. You have been attempting the impossible, and the impossibility itself, not your failure, causes the suffering. But why do humans persist in this futile quest? Here we must descend from psychology to metaphysics. The world in its essence is will. Blind, aimless, insatiable striving without purpose or goal. This will has discovered that in social animals such as ourselves, survival depends on position within the group. Thus it implanted within us a nearly irresistible drive to seek approval, to conform, to belong. The anxiety you feel when contemplating others' disapproval is not your authentic self, but the will's whip, driving you back to the herd where survival seems more certain. I learned this truth through bitter experience. At the University of Berlin, seeking academic recognition, I deliberately scheduled my lectures at the same hour as the celebrated Hegel. 5 students attended my first lecture. Those 5 soon departed. The humiliation was complete and public. But this failure illuminated an essential absurdity. I had been seeking approval from the very people whose judgment I despised. The academic mediocrities who mistook Hegel's obscurantism for profundity. This was asking the blind to judge painting, the deaf to judge music. When you next feel anxiety about others' potential disapproval, pause and perform this simple recognition. This is the will's whip, not my authentic concern. Do not attempt to eliminate the anxiety through force that merely replaces one compulsion with another. Instead, observe it as you would observe weather passing through. When you see the mechanism operating, when you recognize the impulse as the will's strategy rather than your authentic necessity, it loses much of its compulsive power. Do not conclude that because universal approval is impossible, you should cultivate universal disapproval. That is, merely the same error inverted. Like the man who, discovering he cannot please everyone, deliberately offends everyone instead. The goal is neither universal approval nor universal disapproval, but rather selective indifference, becoming genuinely unmoved by most opinions, while remaining discerning about whose judgment merits consideration. The compulsion loses its grip when you understand it not as your moral sensitivity, but as a metaphysical mechanism, the blind will operating through you, caring nothing for your happiness, concerned only with keeping you safely within the group where your ancestors' survival once depended on acceptance. Having recognized the impossibility of universal approval and understood the will's mechanism that drives your pursuit of it, you must now confront a question that will liberate you completely. Who precisely are these judges whose approval you exhaust yourself seeking? Examine them honestly. The neighbor who judges your unconventional choices has catastrophized his own life, his marriage is a battlefield, his children avoid him, his profession bores him into stupefaction. Yet you torment yourself over his opinion. The relative who pressures you toward conventional success has achieved nothing beyond mediocre survival, distinguished neither by wisdom nor accomplishment. The social circle that demands your conformity consists largely of cowards too frightened to live authentically themselves, who therefore cannot tolerate your authenticity as it exposes their cowardice. I observed for years the case of P., the universal accommodator who prided himself on never giving offense. He agreed with everyone, praised every mediocrity, supported every fashionable cause. He imagined himself beloved. In truth, no one respected him. His opinions carried no weight, because everyone knew he held none genuinely. When business reversal struck, those whose favor he had courted for years vanished instantly. He discovered the bitter truth. Relationships built on accommodation dissolve the moment. Accommodation ceases to be useful. Conduct now what I call the authority inventory. List 10 people whose opinions significantly influence your decisions. For each, write specific evidence of their qualifications to judge your life. What have they accomplished that gives them authority? Would you want their life as your own? If you followed their path, would you admire the result? You will discover that most entries remain blank, they possess no credentials beyond proximity, and your mistaken grant of authority. This recognition delivers immediate liberation. The weight of judgment lifts dramatically when you realize most of your judges are unqualified. What seemed like legitimate authority reveals itself as assumed power you mistakenly granted. My own mother, Johanna, a novelist of modest talent who maintained a fashionable salon, constantly criticized my philosophical work as impractical. For years, her disapproval pained me. Then I examined her credentials. She wrote forgettable fiction that sold briefly, then vanished. Her judgment merited no weight. This recognition ended her power over me. We never spoke again, and I felt only relief. Do not conclude that no one's opinion matters. That invites arrogance. A single observation from Goethe taught me more than a decade of academic criticism. But learn to discriminate. Treating all judgments as equal is democratic stupidity. The fool's opinion does not merit the same consideration as the sage's. Once you revoke the authority you mistakenly granted, illegitimate judges lose their power immediately and permanently. Now we must descend from practical observation to philosophical foundation, for without understanding the deepest causes of your bondage, liberation remains superficial and temporary. The world in its essence will not conscious choice or deliberate intention, but blind, aimless, insatiable striving without purpose or goal. This is not poetic metaphor, but metaphysical reality. The force that pulls the stone toward earth, that drives the plant toward light, that compels the animal toward food and reproduction, this same force operates in your craving for approval. You are merely a temporary objectification of this universal will, which cares nothing for your happiness, only for its own perpetuation. During my studies with Friedrich Major, I encountered the Upanishads, those ancient Hindu texts that speak of the world as Maya illusion, obscuring truth. Combined with my understanding of Kant, this revealed that what you call social reality, status, reputation, others' opinions, is phenomenal appearance governed by the principle of sufficient reason, not ultimate essence. The merchant pursuing wealth to impress neighbors, the scholar seeking fame to secure position, both serve the will unknowingly, mistaking shadow for substance. Here lies the crucial recognition. The anxiety you feel when contemplating others, disapproval is not your authentic self, but the will's mechanism for keeping you safely within the group. In our evolutionary past, when humans lived in small bands where exile meant death, this mechanism served survival. But now it serves only to keep you enslaved to opinions you do not respect, pursuing approval from people you do not admire, living a life you did not choose. When you feel the compulsion to accommodate against your genuine preference, perform this mental operation. The will is demanding I secure group position for survival purposes, but I am conscious of this demand, which means I am not identical with it. This creates crucial distance. You are not the anxiety. You are consciousness observing the will's operations. Do not attempt to fight the compulsion through willpower that merely replaces one will manifestation with another. Throughout your day, practice identifying will operations as they arise: hunger, desire for approval, sexual attraction, ambition. Notice each as the will operating rather than what I want. This trains consciousness in the observation that enables denial. You are not weak for experiencing these impulses. You are human, and the will operates through all humans. But you can become conscious of the operations, and consciousness creates the possibility of transcendence. Understanding the will philosophically is necessary but insufficient. You must learn the practical method for piercing Maya's veil in daily life for seeing through the illusions that govern most human existence. I observed for years a wealthy Frankfurt banker whose entire life revolved around maintaining social position. He attended tedious events he despised, cultivated relationships with people he disliked, and made business decisions based on reputation rather than reason. When financial crisis struck, his carefully constructed social edifice collapsed overnight. His friends vanished, his reputation dissolved, and he discovered with horror that he had spent decades serving phantoms. He had been Maya's perfect victim, living entirely within illusion, while believing himself supremely practical. Social reality operates as this kind of veil. Status, reputation, others' opinions, these possess no ultimate reality, yet govern most lives completely. The skill you must cultivate is recognizing when you are trapped in phenomenal appearance versus perceiving essence. When concerned about others' opinions, apply the reality test. Will this matter in 1 year, 5 years? At death, most social anxieties dissolve under this temporal lens. The colleague's disapproval that torments you today will be forgotten within a month. The neighbor's judgment that disturbs your peace possesses no substance. It is mere opinion, changeable as weather. Learn to distinguish substance from shadow. Your character has inherent value. It is what you actually are. Your reputation is shadow. It is merely what others believe you are, and their belief cannot alter your actual nature. Yet observe how humans sacrifice substance to preserve shadow. They compromise genuine principles to maintain false reputations. They betray their authentic nature to secure opinions that will shift with the next scandal or fashion. Practice what I call the Maya meditation. Twice daily, sit quietly for 5 minutes and observe. What am I concerned about right now? For each concern, ask with brutal honesty, is this substance or shadow? You'll discover that most anxieties concern shadow reputation, status, others' opinions, while substance receives scant attention. This recognition alone shifts many decisions from shadow preservation toward substance cultivation. The temporary, eternal distinction clarifies further. You are temporary, a few decades of conscious existence at most, spending this brief flame of consciousness in service of temporary. Opinions themselves based on temporary fashions is geometric madness. Do not conclude that because social reality is Maya, it has no effect. Phenomenal reality operates according to its own laws, but see through it, navigate it without being enslaved by it. Now I must teach you the specific technique that transforms philosophical understanding into lived liberation. Denial of the will is not repression, not willpower, but a particular form of consciousness seeing through that dissolves compulsion. After my Berlin academic failure, I initially attempted to force myself not to care about recognition. This failed completely, producing only internal conflict, one manifestation of will fighting another. The breakthrough came when I simply observed the craving for approval without acting on it or fighting it. The will wants recognition. I observed this wanting. The wanting continued, but it ceased controlling me. This is the crucial distinction. When the impulse to accommodate arises when you feel pressure to agree, though you disagree, to attend, though you prefer solitude, to conform, though it violates your nature practice, this 5-step sequence. First, notice the impulse. Most humans act automatically, unaware that choice exists. Consciousness begins with recognition that an impulse has arisen. Second, pause. Do not act automatically. Between impulse and action, create a gap. In this gap, consciousness operates. Without the gap, you are merely the will's instrument, no different from the stone falling or the plant growing. Third, observe. The will is demanding accommodation. Position yourself as consciousness observing rather than as the impulse itself. There is the desire for approval, differs fundamentally from I desperately need approval. Fourth, ask, what would I choose? if this compulsion did not exist. This reveals your authentic preference beneath the will's demands. Fifth, choose according to your answer, not the will's compulsion. Initially, this feels nearly impossible. The anxiety intensifies. The will does not relinquish its strategies easily. With repetition, authentic choice becomes natural. Begin with small matters where consequences are minimal. Decline a tedious dinner invitation. Contradict an expected opinion in casual conversation. Refuse advice you did not seek and do not need. As capacity develops through small successes, address larger patterns, career choices, family expectations, major life decisions. Do not expect instant mastery. This skill develops gradually, over months, through consistent practice. Initial attempts will fail. You will find yourself accommodating automatically despite intention otherwise. Do not despair. The capacity strengthens like any muscle through repeated exercise. Do not combat desires through willpower. This strengthens them. Observe them. The observed desire loses compulsive power, not through force, but through consciousness. Liberation begins with a single recognition that, once truly grasped, eliminates vast amounts of futile striving. Universal approval is geometrically impossible. This seems obvious when stated, yet observe how humans exhaust themselves attempting it. I watched for years a Frankfurt civil servant who sought simultaneously to satisfy his superior, his subordinates, his wife, her family, his parents, his neighbors, and the church. Each group demanded different, often contradictory things. His superior wanted ruthless efficiency. His subordinates wanted gentle consideration. His wife wanted social advancement. Her family wanted traditional piety. His parents wanted grandchildren. His neighbors wanted quiet. When illness finally forced examination of his life, he saw clearly geometric impossibility. What pleased one party offended another. Satisfying all was not merely difficult, but logically impossible as constructing a square circle. Conduct the contradiction matrix. List 5 important people in your life. For each, write what they expect of you. Observe the contradictions. What pleases your mother offends your wife. What satisfies your employer disturbs your conscience. What impresses your neighbors violates your genuine values. Even if you somehow pleased everyone today, which you cannot, new expectations would arise tomorrow. But most humans require this recognition to become visceral, not merely intellectual. The civil servant understood intellectually that universal approval was impossible, yet continued destroying himself in the attempt until his body forced the lesson through illness. Move from "I understand this" to "I feel this in my bones." When you next feel anxiety about failing to satisfy someone's expectations, immediately recall, this task is impossible. I could not succeed even with infinite effort, because for every person pleased, another objects. Let this recognition settle into your body. The anxiety does not disappear. The will's mechanisms operate automatically, but it loses its grip when you recognize the impossibility clearly. For 1 week, keep what I call the contradiction journal. Record each instance where someone's expectation contradicts another's. Note the specific conflict. By week's end, you will have documented proof that universal approval is impossible. This empirical evidence makes the recognition visceral rather than merely theoretical. Do not use this recognition as excuse for pleasing no one. The point is not to cultivate universal disapproval, but to release yourself from the impossible burden of universal approval. You can still choose to accommodate when genuine reason exists, but choice replaces compulsion. You have released yourself from an impossible task, and the relief is immediate, like setting down a boulder carried for years. Having recognized impossibility, you must now systematically examine your judge's qualifications and discover that most possess none. The relative who criticizes your unconventional path has ruined her own life. Her marriage failed. Her children are estranged. Her career never materialized. Yet you grant her judgment weight. The colleague who condemns your decisions has accomplished nothing admirable in his profession or personal life. The social circle that demands your conformity consists of mediocrities too timid to live authentically, who therefore cannot tolerate your authenticity. My mother Johanna maintained a fashionable Weimar salon and wrote novels of modest talent that sold briefly, then vanished into deserved obscurity. For years, she criticized my philosophical work as impractical, unmarketable, incomprehensible. Her disapproval pained me until I examined her credentials. What had she accomplished that qualified her to judge philosophical work? She wrote forgettable fiction for popular consumption. Her success was temporary, her insight shallow, her understanding of philosophy non-existent. This recognition ended her power over me completely. Conduct the judge's docket. Create a list of everyone whose disapproval you fear. For each, write specific accomplishments that qualify them to judge your life. Has this person demonstrated wisdom in their own existence? Would you want their life as your own? If you followed their path, would you admire the result? Most entries will remain blank. They possess no authority beyond that which you mistakenly granted. Understanding the projection principle helps here. Those who judge you most harshly often project their own failures and fears. The angry uncle, criticizing your unconventional choices, resents his own conventionality. Your freedom reminds him of his cowardice. The friend who calls you selfish for establishing boundaries resents that she lacks courage to establish her own. Their disapproval reveals their limitations, not yours. Learn the authority distinction. Earned authority, Goethe, whose wisdom I respected based on demonstrated insight merits consideration. Assumed authority, academic mediocrities, who assumed their positions, granted them wisdom, merits dismissal. Do not treat all judgments democratically. A single observation from a genuine sage outweighs volumes of criticism from the mediocre masses. When facing pressure to conform, conduct this rapid assessment. Has this person demonstrated wisdom? If answers are negative, their opinion deserves polite dismissal, nothing more. This is not arrogance, it is basic rationality, applied to the question of whose judgment merits weight. Having disqualified external judges, you must now confront the most persistent judge of all, the one who lives inside your own head. The most profound prison is internal. You have internalized the voices of parents, teachers, peers, society until they operate automatically without external enforcement. Long after your father's death, his voice criticizes your choices. Decades after leaving school, your teacher's disapproval echoes in your mind. The prison guard lives inside the cell, and most of what you call others' opinions is actually your own internal critic, wearing borrowed masks. I observed a merchant's son who, 20 years after his father's death, still made decisions based on paternal approval. Father would not have approved this purchase. Father would have judged this friendship unsuitable. Father would have considered this choice impractical. The father's voice lived in his head, criticizing, demanding, judging, though the actual father was 2 decades in the grave. The son was tormented by a phantom, not a person. When finally he recognized this, asking, "Whose voice am I hearing?" and answering honestly, "My father's, not mine," the power dissolved. Practice the voice identification exercise. When internal criticism arises, you should not refuse this invitation. You ought to. Accept their advice. You must consider their feelings, pause, and identify the voice's source. Whose words are these? Usually they belong to a parent, teacher, or authority figure from your past. The voice operates automatically, requiring no external presence. You carry your prison with you. These internalized voices often speak from decades past, applying outdated standards to present circumstances. Your father's voice criticizes choices he never confronted in his own era. Your mother's anxieties reflect conditions that no longer exist. The teacher's prohibitions served institutional control, not your flourishing. Once you identify a voice as phantom rather than authentic self, you can dismiss it consciously. That is my father's voice, not mine. It no longer governs. For 1 week, keep the voice journal. Whenever self-criticism arises, Write the specific criticism and identify whose voice speaks. You will discover patterns. Perhaps your father's voice dominates professional choices while your mother's voice governs social decisions. Recognition disempowers these phantoms immediately. Do not confuse legitimate conscience with internalized voices. Conscience speaks for genuine moral principles. Internalized voices speak for others' preferences and fears. Also, do not attempt to eliminate these voices through force. This merely strengthens them. Observe and dismiss them instead through conscious recognition. Liberation requires empirical testing, not merely intellectual understanding. Theory must become practice through systematic experimentation. After my Berlin failure, I began conducting small experiments in refusal. First, I stopped attending dinner parties that bored me, despite social pressure and the host's potential offense. The feared consequences, social isolation, reputation damage, did not materialize. Emboldened, I refused to modify my philosophical positions to suit academic fashion. Again, no catastrophe occurred. These experiments taught me that most feared consequences exist only in imagination, not reality. The method is scientific. Hypothesis, test, observation. Your hypothesis is that refusing accommodation will produce catastrophe. Test it through small refusals. Observe what actually occurs. In 90% of cases, you will discover that the disaster you imagine does not materialize. Begin with the small stakes principle. Choose matters of minimal consequence for initial experiments. Decline a tedious dinner invitation. Express a contrary opinion in casual conversation. Refuse to seek advice you do not need. Do not begin with high-stakes refusals, declining a family wedding, or contradicting your employer in important meetings. Build capacity gradually through small successes before addressing larger matters. Employ the documentation method. For each experiment, record 3 things: what you refused, what you feared would happen, and what actually happened. The gap between fear and reality will startle you. You feared the friendship would dissolve. It merely adjusted. You feared professional consequences. None occurred. You feared family estrangement. They barely noticed. This week, conduct 3 small refusals. Before each, write your specific fears. After each, document actual consequences. The empirical evidence fears exceeding reality dramatically builds confidence faster than any philosophical argument. Your mind believes its own observations more readily than abstract principles. As confidence builds through documented successes, expand gradually to larger matters. The colleague who constantly requests favors you, resent granting refuse once. The family expectation that violates your genuine preference, contradict it. The social obligation that exhausts you, decline it. With each successful refusal, the capacity strengthens. Expect discomfort, even when catastrophe does not occur. The will's anxiety persists initially, despite empirical evidence. This is normal. The compulsion weakens gradually through repeated observation that survival continues despite refusing accommodation. Do not refuse for refusal's sake. This is mere contrarianism. The goal is authentic choice, not automatic opposition. Choose according to your genuine preference, whether that means refusing or accommodating. Not all opinions are equal, and treating them as such is democratic stupidity that wastes your finite attention on worthless judgments. During my winter with Goethe in Weimar, his rare criticisms of my early work improved it substantially. He possessed genuine wisdom, earned through decades of literary mastery and philosophical depth. Meanwhile, the academic mediocrities at Berlin produced volumes of criticism that, had I heeded it, would have ruined my philosophy entirely. They advocated obscurity over clarity, fashion over truth, career advancement over insight. Learning to weigh Goethe's single observation above the academic's collective judgment was essential to producing valuable work. Wisdom possesses specific markers. It clarifies rather than obscures. It illuminates patterns you sensed but could not articulate. It comes from demonstrated competence in the relevant domain. Most feedback you receive possesses none of these qualities. It reflects the speaker's preferences, fears, or conventional assumptions, not genuine insight. Create what I call the qualification hierarchy. Rank people whose opinions reach you by their actual credentials, philosophical depth, life wisdom, relevant accomplishment. Be ruthlessly honest. Most will rank near zero. Your neighbor who judges your career choices has accomplished nothing in his own career. Your relative who criticizes your relationships has catastrophized her own. The social acquaintance who questions your choices has never demonstrated courage to live authentically. Treat attention as finite resource requiring wise investment. Investing it in mediocrity's opinions is economic stupidity, wasting valuable capital on worthless assets. When receiving feedback or criticism, immediately assess the source. Has this person demonstrated wisdom in the relevant area? Do I respect their judgment based on evidence of competence? If yes, consider carefully. If no, dismiss politely but completely. Practice what I call magnificent indifference, becoming genuinely unmoved by majority opinion. Not combative dismissal, which still grants the opinion's power through opposition, but serene disregard. When dogs bark at you during your walk, you do not stop to argue with them. Treat most human judgments similarly. Conduct the wisdom inventory. List 10 people whose opinions regularly influence you. For each, rate their actual wisdom and competence from 1 to 10 based on evidence, not assumption. Most will score below 5. Adjust your attention accordingly. Invest where rating is high. Disregard where it is low. This is not arrogance, but basic discrimination. You will discover that 95% of feedback comes from unqualified sources. Dismissing it saves vast time and mental energy while protecting you from bad guidance disguised as helpful advice. As you cease performing and begin living authentically, most relationships will dissolve. This is not tragedy, but clarification, the removal of illusion revealing reality beneath. The Frankfurt merchant, once liberated from constant accommodation, watched his social circle shrink dramatically. Former friends who'd enjoyed his hospitality, benefited from his generosity, and exploited his connections vanished when he ceased providing these advantages. He grieved initially, interpreting the dissolution as loss. Then recognition came. He had lost nothing real, merely exposed what was always illusory. 3 genuine friendships remained and deepened substantially because they had been based on mutual recognition rather than mutual manipulation. Most relationships rest on mutual performance. I pretend to be what you want. You pretend to be what I want. We call this friendship or love. When performance ceases, the relationship has no foundation. One party or both. Recognize that nothing genuine connects them. Only the now abandoned accommodation created the appearance of connection. Apply the parasitism test. Those who object most loudly when you stop accommodating were likely exploiting your accommodation. Their protests reveal their character, not yours. The friend who called you selfish for establishing boundaries was benefiting from your boundarylessness. The relative who accuses you of changing resents losing their compliant servant. The colleague who claims you have become difficult was enjoying your difficulty avoidance. Genuine relationships survive your transformation because they were based on actual recognition. These people appreciate your authenticity more than your accommodation. They had been constrained by your performance. Your fakeness prevented genuine connection. As you become authentic, these relationships deepen because finally both parties can be real with each other. Understand the small number principle. Quality versus quantity. 3 genuine connections provide infinitely more than 30 performed relationships. The energy you expended maintaining false facades now becomes available for deepening real connections. The time you spent in tedious social obligations now serves authentic relationship. As you practice authenticity, maintain the relationship audit. Track which relationships strengthen, weaken, or dissolve. Document who supports versus who objects to your transformation. The pattern reveals which connections were genuine versus which were exploitative. This awareness prevents misplaced guilt over necessary losses. Do not attempt to preserve dissolving relationships through renewed performance. This merely postpones the inevitable while exhausting you further. Let them go. Do not become bitter about dissolving relationships. They serve their purpose for a time and now end naturally, as all things must. What you have practiced liberation from people-pleasing is not merely social adjustment, but training in the fundamental human possibility, consciousness transcending its own conditioning. After liberating myself from academic approval-seeking, I discovered that other forms of desire also loosened their grip. The craving for wealth, comfort, recognition, all became less compelling. The capacity to observe and deny, once developed in one domain, transferred to others. Like a muscle strengthened through specific exercise, then available for varied tasks, consciousness trained in one denial became capable of broader denials. The skill you developed is transferable to all domains. When craving for comfort arises, when you wish to remain in bed rather than take your necessary walk, apply the same technique. The will wants comfort. I observe this wanting. When desire for acquisition emerges, when you covet possessions you do not. Need observe it. The will seeks accumulation. I witness this impulse without being identical to it. Each successful observation strengthens consciousness for the next denial. Understand the hierarchy of denials. Liberation from approval-seeking is easier than liberation from sexual desire, which is easier than liberation from self-preservation instinct. The will's grip varies in strength across different drives. Begin with easier denials and progress toward harder ones systematically. Do not attempt to deny all desires simultaneously. Through heroic effort, this invites failure and despair. Once you pierce Maya in one area, seeing through the illusion that your value depends on approval, the veil becomes transparent everywhere. You begin questioning every inherited assumption. Why pursue wealth beyond sufficiency? To impress others. Why seek status and titles? To secure others' esteem. Strip away motivations rooted in others' opinions. And how much conventional ambition remains? Almost none. This specific liberation opens toward general awakening. The same awareness that allows recognizing the need for approval as the will's mechanism allows recognizing all desires as such. This is the foundation of every genuine spiritual practice, from Buddha to the Christian mystic's consciousness observing itself until observation dissolves compulsion. Begin the expanded observation practice. Daily, identify 3 desires beyond approval: seeking comfort, acquisition, status, pleasure. For each, practice the observer position. The will wants this. I observe the wanting. Do not attempt to eliminate desires through force. Observe them with increasing clarity. Do not conclude that because you have liberated yourself from approval-seeking, you have achieved complete freedom. This is preliminary training, not ultimate achievement. The path extends far beyond where we have traveled. But you possess now the fundamental tool for transcending the will's tyranny in all its forms. The people-pleaser believes his constant accommodation constitutes compassion. It does not. True compassion arises from entirely different ground. I observed 2 men responding to a beggar in Frankfurt. The first, a habitual accommodator, gave coins while inwardly resenting it. He feared others watching would judge him heartless if he refused. His giving served his fear, not the beggar's need. The second man, liberated from approval-seeking, sometimes gave, sometimes did not, based on genuine assessment of need and circumstance. Paradoxically, the second man's giving, though less frequent, came from authentic compassion rather than cowardly fear of others' judgment. Apply the compassion test to distinguish genuine from counterfeit. True compassion persists when costly or inconvenient. Counterfeit accommodation evaporates when no longer advantageous to the giver. When you feel moved to help someone, examine your motivation honestly. Am I acting from recognition of shared suffering or from fear of disapproval if I refuse? Genuine compassion recognizes that all beings participate in the same essential suffering. At the deepest level, the level of will, the boundary between self and other is phenomenal appearance, not ultimate reality. When I see another creature in distress, I recognize my own will to live reflected there, subject to the same frustrations and pains. This recognition produces authentic sympathy suffering with. The people-pleaser's accommodation springs from different ground entirely. He fears conflict, so he agrees. He fears rejection, so he complies. He fears standing alone, so he joins every chorus. His motive is fundamentally self-protective, though disguised in the costume of selflessness. Understand the self-prerequisite. You cannot give what you do not possess. The people-pleaser, having no genuine self, being merely a hollow mirror reflecting others' expectations, can only be consumed, not give himself. When you possess authentic selfhood, you become capable for the first time of genuine generosity, because you have something genuine to give. The ethical distinction becomes clear. Will denial, authentic compassion, versus will service disguised as morality, counterfeit accommodation. The former recognizes unity and responds with genuine care. The latter serves fear and manipulates through performed concern. For 1 week, conduct the motivation examination. Each time you help someone or accommodate their request, immediately write your honest motivation, genuine compassion, or fear of disapproval. The ratio will surprise and perhaps shame you, but awareness alone begins shifting accommodation toward authentic compassion. Do not conclude that because accommodation is not compassion, you should help no one. Authentic compassion is real and valuable. Also, do not become self-righteous about your authentic. Compassion pride corrupts it immediately. This liberation comes with a price that most humans consider unbearable. Solitude. When you cease performing for approval, when you withdraw from the exhausting theater of universal accommodation, you will spend more time alone. My last 30 years in Frankfurt have been largely solitary. Daily walks alone regardless of weather. Meals alone at the Englischer Hof. Evenings with my poodle and my books. Society considers this pitiable, the aging philosopher without wife, children, or social circle. I consider it liberation. The quiet hours alone with my thoughts, my work, my genuine interests, these contain more satisfaction than decades of fashionable salon attendance ever provided. Distinguish solitude from loneliness. Solitude is a chosen state of authentic presence, being alone without being lonely. Loneliness is a painful state of unwanted isolation. The liberated person experiences the former, never the latter. Not everyone can bear solitude. It requires developed inner life. Those whose identity depends entirely on others. Reflections cannot endure their own company. They need constant social stimulation, because when alone they encounter the void where a self should reside. The unexpected rewards of solitude emerge gradually. In solitude, consciousness achieves clarity impossible in social noise. Your genuine preferences, values, and nature emerge only when others' demands cease drowning them out. You discover interests you never knew you possessed. You recognize thoughts and insights that could never surface amid constant social performance. Paradoxically, embracing solitude often brings genuine connection. When you no longer desperately need others' approval, people appreciate your authenticity. Quality relationships emerge when you renounce the quest for quantity. The few who remain after you stop performing are those who value you as you actually are. Begin cultivating capacity for solitude systematically through the solitude practice. 3 times weekly, spend 30 minutes alone without any distraction, no reading, no task, no entertainment. Simply sit with your own consciousness. Initially, this produces profound discomfort, even anxiety. The will resists this quietude. Persist. As capacity develops, solitude becomes restorative rather than draining. Schedule regular solitude as you would schedule any important practice. It requires deliberate cultivation in a world that fears silence and aloneness. Document what emerges: thoughts, preferences, recognitions you never accessed amid social noise. Do not confuse deliberate solitude with social avoidance from fear. The liberated person chooses solitude from strength, not from weakness. Do not become misanthropic. The goal is not to hate humanity, but to no longer depend on its approval for your existence. You can now endure, indeed, embrace solitude that would terrify the people-pleaser. This capacity for your own company is perhaps the ultimate liberation. You no longer require constant external validation because you have discovered internal sufficiency. You have traveled from recognition of bondage through philosophical grounding, practical transformation, and integrated embodiment to ultimate understanding. The path continues. These teachings merely begin the journey that extends throughout life. But you possess now the map, the method, and the capacity to walk it authentically.